And now for the second part of this video, where I will be talking about this. So, a post was made by Rio Vidal, who is a monotype head, and they gave out a tiering survey, basically surveying everyone who participated or watched, like me, MWP 7, and they wanted our thoughts on the metagame. So, I thought that this survey would be a good point to basically show my thoughts on the metagame and show you guys where my head is at with this entire metagame right now. So, with that being said, let's take a look at the survey. So, how enjoyable did I find the current metagame? So, this current metagame that we saw, or at least what I saw in MWP, was very good. I think that MWP matches were very fun to watch, and I think that there's a lot of variety shown, and a lot of types had their chance to shine. Like, if we look back at the usage, a lot of types were actually used. There was a lot of representation. There wasn't like one type dominating all. Like, yeah, Dragon was used a ton, but Water, Flying, and Dark didn't have that many less games that were played. I would say a lot of types were used. Like, I would say Fighting to Dragon was all relatively common types that you would see, but the fringer types like Ghost and Fire and Bug being really nice to see as well. And it felt like most of the time there weren't that many monotype moments, but obviously, like the one we just saw with Fire vs. Steel, there's still that happening potentially with certain matchups, but I still feel like, for the most part, in most of these games, both sides were very capable of winning, even with disadvantageous positions. And I think that's definitely the sign of a very good metagame. That being said, though, I can't really think of anything that was really annoying to watch in terms of this entire tournament, but when it comes to laddering in this metagame, and this is very different from watching tournament games, because tournament games are very different environment from ladder. Because on ladder you will run into specific sets that are either cheesy or they're looking to fish for a certain matchup that's usually common on the ladder. Like, maybe they run a set that's specifically good against Dragon and Dark, but doesn't really do well against Steel and something else. Like, something like that. Like running a... What's a good example? A good example would probably be Ogerpon Cornerstone on Fire to specifically deal with flying a little more, because they really just don't like dealing with flying, even though Sunfire does really well against flying. But yeah, let's just say, for example, they're running that instead. Stuff like that can still catch you off guard and affect how you feel about the metagame, but when it comes to cheesy sets like that, I feel like there are a couple that are a little annoying, and Sunfire generally to run into that as someone that's trying to play ladder and play like against a wide variety of types. Having to specifically make sure that your team doesn't lose to Sunfire is quite a bit annoying, especially if you want to run something a little bit more fun. So I would say that that is a little annoying, but that is just how most weather teams work, because it's the same thing with Rainwater. There's not really a lot of easy ways for a lot of types to deal with Rainwater. Barraskewda just spamming Liquidation over and over again, or Kingdra spamming Draco Meteors over and over again. Some types just can't deal with that. And I do think that the offensive types in this metagame can feel really oppressive to go against if you aren't super prepared for them. But with that being said, I think it could be a lot worse. So, and this tournament showed that it is possible to deal with those types with very casual team building. You don't even have to hyper prepare for them or have like this anti-rain mon or anti-fire mon. No, you can just have these Pokemon on your team and the team will just generally be good. And I think that is the sign of a good metagame. So, I do still dislike running into some of the checkmate types, but that is just monotype in general, so I can't really hold it against this specific generation, or this specific metagame. So I will give this metagame a 8 out of 10. And the reason why I'm not giving it a 10 is because, unfortunately, if we were in a utopian situation every single type in monotype should be relatively viable. This is obviously going to be impossible, which is why I said it's going to be a utopian thing, because of the nature of the type chart and the way certain mons are, like, I would genuinely be impressed if we ever managed to get a monotype where every single type is viable at a tournament level. Like, I would genuinely be impressed if we ever managed to get that to happen. And it's not even the fault of the types or us just banning specific types as mons or stuff like that. It's just an unfortunate consequence of us trying to make this metagame as balanced as possible. Some types are just not going to be as good as others because of the way they are. Like, Ice is just chronically not going to be a good type because it's just not good in general. Even in the standard play, there's very few Ice mons that are very good, and usually the ones that are good are Giga Broken, so it is what it is when it comes to that. But yes, in a utopian society, I would say that every type should be viable. And in this metagame specifically, I do think that this metagame does have very good type diversity, but obviously I can't give it a 10 because every type should have been viable, and Ice wasn't used a single time this entire tournament, so yeah, Psychic and Grass were used, but they didn't do too well. Even though the teams that were brought were solid, they still just weren't able to do what they needed to do. And I wouldn't really hold it against the people that brought those types, but it is definitely a little bit sad to not see every single type get a W in the highest level of play for bottom type. So because of that, I will give it an 8, but otherwise I think this metagame is actually in a really, really good spot because there's a lot of variety and a lot of set type diversity that I saw in this tournament, and it was very nice to watch. So let's move on to the next question. How competitive and balanced do you find the current metagame? So we talked a lot about this already, but I would say that when it comes to how balanced the metagame is, I would say it's definitely a 9 out of 10. And actually, no, I'll give it an 8, because it's going to be the same score as the above one, because I do think that this metagame is incredibly enjoyable, but I should be able to use every type in the game and be able to have some level of fun, and some types are just literally a Herculean task to play, or a Sisyphusian task to play. Like, playing Ice or Grass on the ladder generally feels really unfun because you have to run some insane stuff, like Abomasnow of all things. But yeah, that's why I give this an 8 out of 10, because some types you have to work a little bit too hard in order to play, whereas other types you don't have to think nearly as much. And I feel like every type should feel, there shouldn't be like types where you're legitimately just unable to do well or get high ladder with, because obviously L-Trank is an example, uses Bug primarily and is able to hit high ladder. Like, that's good. That shows that some lower tier types are viable, but the fact that that's impressive, and this isn't to say that L-Trank doesn't deserve to be called a good player. He's a very, very good player, but it shouldn't be impressive that he used Bug to reach that high of a ladder ranking, right? Because it should just be natural for him to hit a high ladder ranking, and he just happened to use Bug, and shouldn't be impressive that he used Bug. What I'm trying to say here is that Bug as a type should have just been on the same level as the other types, so it isn't as shocking when people perform on those types. If someone were to get high ladder on Ice, people would say that's impressive. It shouldn't be impressive. In an ideal ladder metagame, it shouldn't be impressive to do that. And it shouldn't be like that, because every type should feel somewhat on an even-ish playing field. Like I said, this is obviously impossible, and I'm not holding it against this metagame at all. But in a utopian scenario, that's why I'm not giving it a 10 out of 10, is because it would have to be a utopian scenario. I know a lot of other people will disagree with the way I'm rating this, but this is just how I think, and how I view competitive integrity in monotype. So with that being said, I will say that when it comes to being competitive and balanced, I will say it's an 8, because if it was perfectly balanced, it would be, every type would be able to be played at a somewhat high level. And the fact that it's not the case is sad. So that is what I'll put for that. And now onto the controversial stuff. So how do I feel about Gliscor and the current Scarlet and Violet monotype metagame? So we've watched a lot of flying games, and we've seen Gliscor in pretty much almost all of those flying games. Gliscor is just a really, really good mon in my opinion. It's not overpowered. The issue is that it's just really good. It's the issue that Landorus Therian had an OU back in like Gen 7 or Gen 8, when it had like an obscene amount of usage. Gliscor is just simply way too good at its job and way too versatile. But it's not actually just a mon that straight up makes certain playstyles unviable or just completely wins matchups on its own. Like, obviously it will do that to certain types with specific sets, but it's not like literally it's not quite like Chen Pao or Chi Yu where they literally just exist and it doesn't matter what type you're using it, it's just going to run the same set and just run straight through your team. It's not like that. It just is a very good Swiss Army knife of tools that flying teams need. And because of that, it does feel frustrating to play against because it will be everywhere and it's also a wall, so of course it's going to be frustrating to play against. And it's a wall you can't use Toxic on, it's a wall you can't knock off the item of and actually cripple it because after it gets Toxic Orb, it doesn't really need to be Toxic Orb again, and that can be really annoying for Poltergeist users, but yeah. Gliscor can just feel very annoying to play against, and it's been like this forever. This mon has always been doing this. And it used to have Roost as well, so this is a nerfed version of Gliscor, and it's still really frustrating to play with, or play against. But I will say, after looking at this tournament, outside of a few edge cases, I would say Gliscor is pretty fine. Because, yes, there are some people that definitely brought Hex on a couple of their mons, specifically to deal with Gliscor, but Hex is also just good on a lot of those teams, because most of the time, Hex was used on Gholdengo or Ghost types. And they'll use that anyway, because most Ghost teams typically tend to spam spam status ailments anyway, through either Dragonfold or Gholdengo itself, or Pekka runs. And Steel teams also can just use Thunderwave Gholdengo. That's just a viable set that it runs. It's not specifically for Gliscor, it runs it for literally anything. It's just a naturally good set on Gholdengo. So, can other types use Hex? Yes, they can, but they don't have to, because they can also just run through flying teams, because flying teams are all typically run the same way. For they're very semi-stallish, and if one Blonde falls on a flying team, the rest of the type typically tends to crumble, because that's how solid defensive teams work. If one piece of the puzzle falls apart, everything in the system starts to fall apart. So, and there are powerful enough breakers to break through Gliscor, as well as powerful ice moves as well, and powerful water moves that a majority of types do have access to. And like I said, there are a few edge cases where Gliscor can be extreme, but that is with every single mon, or not every single mon, but with a lot of the mons in this metagame. Like, even the ones you see listed after this one. Those ones are also the same thing. They all have edge cases, where they seem very oppressive. But this has been a thing in Monotype forever. It's like, there was a... If those of you who are older can remember, in Gen 7, there was an uprising to ban Caesar from the metagame because of how obscenely oppressive it was against Fairy, Ice, and Rock specifically. It just completely made those types unplayable because of how powerful it was. But we never banned Caesar, and the metagame was fine. Because Caesar, even though it has those high moments, it has those other moments where it's perfectly fine as a mon. It's what happens when you have a high power level metagame, like we did with Sun and Moon. And SV is no different. It's another high level power. It's another high power level metagame, and so mons are going to look very broken or very useless at the same time. Like we watched that Salamence just get one shot, And maybe it was actually pretty decently good because it had heavy duty boots and intimidate. Maybe it was actually a decent wall. We don't know. Because it got one hit KO'd instantly. And it's not to say that Gliscor can't also have those low moments, because sometimes it might be up against a team that just has plenty of ice moves, bulk beam coverage, or very strong water users. Like, for example, it's against a fairy team with Primarina, and it just gets one-shot by Primarina using Surf. Like, that can just happen, and it can feel useless sometimes. But yes, I do agree that it is an obnoxious Pokemon. Most walls in the game are. But I don't think that Gliscor is very broken. Because I believe that if it was extremely broken, it would essentially make entire playstyles unviable, and there would have to be Gliscor's killer sets specifically on every single type to deal with that mod. As I said before, it is just a very solid Pokemon on its types, and I think that it is fine. I don't think it needs to be tiered against, I don't think it needs to be banned. I think it is an annoying mod, I will say that, it is very obnoxious. But I don't think it needs to be banned, and I think flying teams will suffer greatly with its removal, because, like I said, it just does a lot of stuff that flying needs. If you remove it, flying teams will start to have a lot of trouble, because now they don't have a solid, consistent Stealth Rock setter. They'd have to go resort to Landorus Therian or non-Landorus Therian. Sorry, Lando I or Origin, but... and also has to use a Skarmory as well as like a Stealth Rock setter, because the reason why Gliscor is so good with Skarmory is because they can use both sets of hazards. Now that's going to be a lot harder, and they have to be reliant on Landorus, who just doesn't provide like a toxic immunity or just a consistent wall that can consistently heal and do all of that. Flying teams would be a lot easier to deal with, but it doesn't really... it just makes it harder for flying to actually function against very high power teams. And I feel like that isn't fair to flying, because yes, flying is still a powerful type, and it is very annoying to go against, but I don't think losing Gliscor makes the type a lot healthier, because it's not like flying is hurting for type diversity, or team diversity either. It's not like you're literally forced to use Gliscor, or you're forced to run a specific comp because of Gliscor. We've seen other mons get used on flying, and we've also seen Gliscor list teams as well, but flying just really likes Gliscor, and I think that's perfectly acceptable, and because it isn't doing anything really egregious or really obnoxious outside of edge cases, I think it's fine. So that'll be all I talk about Gliscor, because I could go on for more and more about how I feel like this mod is just fine, but I will say Gliscor is fine right now. Alright, now for Volcarona. It's actually really funny, because I recently just played a couple of room tour matches, and in the final match I used Volcarona, and we watched Volcarona get a bunch of boosts from Fiery Dance, and fortunately dodge a Hisuian Gudra Dragon Tail and just sweep an entire... and I swept an entire Dragon team with that mon on a 40% HP. I actually wish I could save the replay for that, because that would have just been another example of a high moment that Volcarona can just have. That being said though, Volcarona has, and again, been a historic mon in Monotype that has just been ridiculous. Like, a couple of Quiver Dances, and suddenly your entire team is just completely doomed. This has been a thing forever. Now, what hasn't been a thing forever is Volcarona actually opting to use Morning Sun on the types that it's on. And also historically, Volcarona's types weren't usually that good, if you can actually remember. Because in Gen 8, Fire and Bug weren't all that, And in Gen 7, same story, Fire and Bug weren't all that. And this is most notable because people were not asking to ban Heat Rock in Gen 8 or 7. When Heat Rock was arguably still probably a good thing to bring with the mons that Fire has. So, with that being said, I do think that Volcarona, specifically in this generation, is a bit more annoying than it usually is because of the bulkier sets. Because typically it uses the full glass cannon sets, and usually the options weren't really what spread is it. It's going to be what moves are you having on it. Like, are you going to have Psychic, are you going to have Giga Drain, stuff like that. But now it seems to be whether or not you're super bulky, or you can go Glass Cannon, or if you have like Will-O-Wisp of all things and Substitute. Like, the fatter Volcarona sets are just generally insane to me. And I do think those are actually incredibly obnoxious, and that's unique to this gen. That's not historic. Like, that is just this gen that has that problem with Volcarona. But even with all of that said, I still think Volcarona is okay in the metagame. And again, it's because of the types that it's on. If Volcarona was somehow on Fairy and was doing the exact same thing, I would say it's probably needs tiering action, or needs to get looked at. But hold on. Actually, I didn't really read this properly. I will put this in there, because this is probably going to be what I put for Volcarona as well, but I'm going to explain myself. So, Volcarona, I think, is just one of those offensive Pokemon that can just completely take over a game. Like, most set of supers can take over games, but Volcarona specifically has always been really impressive with that. And I do think that if it had a better team support, I would say action would need to get taken. But fortunately, its teammates on both types aren't really able to support it as well as they would need to. And you think that's insane because of how well it still does on those types. But generally, Volcarona still doesn't have the correct amount of team support. It's banned in OU right now, but that was mainly because of Terra, to be fair. But Volcarona in general is still just generally really powerful, and getting the right teammates for Volcarona just makes that one completely obnoxious to deal with. But fortunately, Fire and Bug both lack crucial mobs that allow Volcarona to do what it does. Mainly good pivoters, or not really good pivoters, but just really solid physical attack. Really solid physical attackers that can easily also get Volcarona onto the field, or just really good hazing and phasing, really good walls specifically. That could just allow Volcarona to just bounce in and out and create those situations slowly. Because notice, both types don't really do hazard stack that well. Fire doesn't even try to, well, they do set hazards sometimes with Heatran, but generally you won't see Heatran set rocks in most Fire games, and even if they do set rocks, it will be very rarely. I think Port Change ends up doing it more of the time, but that could be me being out of touch. But yeah, generally Fire doesn't really do hazard stack that much. And Bug, while it does have Cleavor, it also still doesn't do hazard stack that much, and it just keeps the rocks up. And rocks doesn't mean anything nowadays because of Volcarona just always having heavy duty boots and just taking no damage from them. So Volcarona has a lot. So because of the lack of rocks, I actually messed up my point here, but my point was originally going to be, because they don't have a ton of hazards that are racking up like a ton of damage against most meta types like Water, Fairy, and types that just take neutral damage or resisted damage, crucially against Stealth Rock. Because they aren't getting that chip, Volcarona isn't able to find the opportunities it needs to really clean up, and they instead have to rely on their powerful breakers or spam. Excuse me, spamming of powerful moves in order to create those openings for Volcarona. because they can't really set it up very naturally or very efficiently. They have to like force holes through the team, and that is normal for most teams as well for their setup sweepers, but Volcarona specifically does need a very specific game state in order to become powerful, and Bug and Fire just aren't really good at doing that, in my opinion. If it was on another type, I think it would have to get banned, but I think because of the types that Volcarona is on, even with Sunfire being as powerful as it can be in its edge cases, I think that Volcarona is generally fine. Because Sun being good actually does make Volcarona a bit more annoying as well because of Volcarona is able to get the max heal off with Morning Sun, which allows those walling sets to be a thing, and I do think those sets are very obnoxious, but we still didn't see it that much because there's a lot of prep you can do for it. You have Power Gem on those mons, and Photosynthesis on almost a bunch of meta types in the game does not help. I do think Volcarona is kind of polarizing against certain types, like the lower tier types can't deal with Volcarona too well, but the higher tier types can deal with Volcarona pretty well. Because like if you think about the lower tier types, you have stuff like Grass, Bug, Psychic to an extent as well, Ice. Those types, they can kind of deal with Volcarona, but not nearly as well as the meta types can. And that's definitely going to be an issue for people who want to play those types in the ladder, which I know we usually focus on tour play for a majority of this, but I do think ladder play is very important to keep track of because that is what most people will be playing. And if you don't have people playing on the ladder, how are you going to get people to play in tours if they don't really like the metagame and haven't been able to play around with it? So ladder is important, and if people aren't able to play ladder and enjoy ladder playing the types that they like, then I think it is generally a not good thing if that mon is forcing people who want to play those lower tier types. That mon is single-handedly stopping them from being able to play the game. I don't think that's healthy, but with that being said, I do still think that Volcarona is fine, because there are still lower tier types that can do fine into Volcarona. It's not like literally a tier checking mon, because Rock obviously can deal with Volcarona extremely easily, and other types like well, we see Fairy is able to deal with it, even though Fairy probably isn't going to be considered a lower tier type anymore, but Fairy, Ground, those types can deal with Volcarona just fine as well. But yeah, Volcarona, I feel like it's just fine. It's definitely a polarizing mon though, and I wouldn't be opposed to people wanting it to get banned. I just personally don't think it needs to. But if people feel like it needs to be banned, I will not be making posts trying to defend it. I will let them do what they need to do, and that will be that for Volcarona. Next mod we have is Ogerpon-H. So Ogerpon Hearthblade. So this is pretty much exclusively, the problematic aspect of it is exclusively on fire. So we're not even going to talk about grass at all. But on fire, Ogerpon-H, I definitely think is kind of oppressive with, like, Ogerpon-H is actually exactly what I was talking about with Volcarona and what it kind of avoids. Well, Ogerpon-H feels like a tier checker. Like, it just feels like it completely just destroys certain types by itself under Sun, and there's just almost nothing you can do about it. Like, you basically need to make sure that your team doesn't lose to this mon, or you have a check for it. Because otherwise, if you run into this mon, you're not going to have a fun time. And I do think that is slightly unhealthy, especially in a ladder sense. Because if you're always constantly prepping for it, obviously it's fine. But if you're on the ladder and you just want to run a team, but it doesn't have a specific check for Ogerpon-H, you're not going to have fun at all. And I do think that is very obnoxious. Now, I can't say, with what we saw in MWP, I can't fully say that Ogerpon-H is unbalanced. but I definitely do think it is one of those mons that I typically think makes an unhealthy metagame. So at the highest level, it's perfectly fine, but for general play, it is annoying to deal with. And it's not like Gliscor, where it's like a very versatile mon that can do a lot of things. It is running almost the exact same set every single time, with like a couple of variations, like maybe it'll run Trailblaze, maybe it'll run Superpower, maybe it'll run Play Rough, maybe it'll run Power Whip or Horn Leech over Power Whip and stuff like that. Like, those are minor deviations. It's never running like truly unique sets that accomplish different things for fire or allows like different playstyles. It is just an offensive Pokemon that just spams Swords Dance, Ivy Cudgel, and maybe two other random moves. That's all it's doing. It's not really doing anything crazy. So, because of that, I do think it's very lame as a mon, and I do think it's slightly unbalanced. I wouldn't say it needs to get banned, because obviously, as this tournament has shown, it's very easy, or it is preppable, and it is easy to deal with specific types, but I would say in a tie moments, Ogerpon-H is definitely running into the seesaw territory where certain types just cannot deal with it at all, but other types can deal with it, but they still are generally a little bit inconvenienced, and that is what's keeping me a little bit on the edge with this mon. So I will say I have a neutral opinion on it. I don't think it's incredibly balanced. I don't think it's that balanced, and I don't think it's insanely broken, but I also don't think it's very good for the game. It would hurt fire a lot if it lost it though, so that's also another reason why I can't be super on the bandwagon for Ogerpon-H, but yeah, I definitely don't like that mod very much, which might come as a shock to a lot of you because I don't really complain about Ogerpon-H that much, because most of the types I run usually can deal with it just fine. But I definitely do think, and I feel for the people that have to deal with that mon, it just have to deal with its frustrating playstyle, and it feels like it's skillless, and yeah, it's an obnoxious mon. I completely see that, and I would not be opposed to this thing being banned. So I do have a neutral opinion on it, but yeah, I see both sides with this mon. It's a mess. It's truly a mess. Next we have Gholdengo. So, a lot of complaints about Gholdengo are around Good as Gold just being a busted ability. Yeah, it's a busted ability. I would say it's definitely a busted ability. And that shouldn't be shocking at all. Being immune to status moves as a whole just completely removes a fundamental part of the game for a lot of players. And a lot of teams. And Gholdengo is powerful in OU because of this as well. So this is just a power problem with its ability. But I think the one thing that people are leaving out when talking about this mon is the fact that even despite this overpowered ability, its stats aren't super oppressive. And it's also still running a wide variety of sets as well. Because you will occasionally see Choice Scarf from time to time, you'll see Nasty Paw, you'll see Thunder Wave, you'll see bulkier recover sets. Like, Gholdengo is running, I would say Gholdengo's in like a similar camp to Gliscor, where it just does a lot of stuff that Steel and Ghost wanted to do, and it just does it like incredibly well. And I generally think that Gholdengo is a completely fine Pokemon. Because yes, it is obnoxious that it does switch into status moves like Thunder Wave or even Taunt, and it's just not able to get affected by them at all. Also blocking stuff like Whirlwind and Defog, crucially, is also obnoxious. And it basically makes it impossible to control hazards against Ghost and Steel teams, but as we've seen in these games, Gholdengo is just a mon that you can deal with. And you can deal with it in healthy ways too, because like I said, its stats aren't oppressive, it's not solo sweeping teams, it's not completely destroying certain archetypes by itself. It's it's a perfectly fine Pokemon doing perfectly fine things. It just happens to also have a ridiculously powerful ability. But this is, I would say this is probably akin to stuff like Clefable, where Clefable has an obscenely powerful ability as well, but its stats are like fine, and because the stats are fine, it's not doing anything insane. So, I think that Gholdengo is perfectly fine, and I don't think it needs to get banned. Because Ghost has been begging for a mod like this forever. Or, not Ghost, but Steel players have been begging for a mod like this forever. They've always wanted a Steel Ghost type that wasn't obscenely broken like Aegislash. And now they're finally getting it. And I think that that is fun for Steel. And I think that that is a fine thing for Steel teams to have. Now, the only other issue I have with Gholdengo is that it may or may not be a low-key requirement for Steel teams specifically, not for Ghost teams. Ghost teams still would generally probably like having it on the team, but I wouldn't say it's 100% necessary on Ghost teams. But on Steel teams, it is low-key very necessary, because it forms the immunity core with Heatran, where you block fighting moves, and now you also block fire moves, and then you get Steel Flying types, and now you block ground moves. The immunity core just feels really good and really solid, and I'm not sure if that can be considered unhealthy. I think that's just very good synergy with Pokemon. So I'm very torn on whether or not I feel like that's broken or not. Because it is a very solid immunity core, and it makes Steel very hard to break. But at the same time, Steel is still manageable, even with Gholdengo. And I don't even think Gholdengo is even the most egregious mon with it. I still think Heatran is arguably the most egregious mon, with stopping certain types from, or stopping certain Pokemon from just outright sweeping Steel. I think Heatran's definitely the most egregious one, instead of Gholdengo. But I know some people will probably disagree with that, but I do think that Gholdengo isn't really a super problematic Pokemon, because like I said, it as an immunity, because unlike Aegislash in past generations, where it was just an insanely powerful Pokemon, and just did these ridiculous things with King Shield and the Toxic Stall sets, and also just flipping between having to deal with Toxic Stall or Nasty Plot, and whichever one you had to deal with was just going to basically decide the game. And even if it was the one and it wasn't the other one, it'd still be extremely problematic, because both sets are just incredibly good. Yeah, Aegislash was completely obnoxious because of the fact that it could just pretty much do it all. It is already an extremely solid Pokemon, and it made an extremely solid type nearly impossible to deal with. So, Aegislash being gone makes complete sense. Gholdengo, nowhere near that level, and that's why I think it's completely fine. Because it's not Aegislash, and I know that that may be an unfair comparison because Aegislash is an incredibly insane Pokemon, but I do think Gholdengo is just not doing what Aegislash is doing, and it just isn't doing anything that's super, super unhealthy. And I attest that mainly to its stats, because its stats aren't insane. Like, yes, it has very good special attack, but its speed is manageable. It's not insanely bulky. If you invest into bulk, it can be bulky, but it's not like an obscenely tanky Pokemon. And the recover nerfs actually help a lot, because it can only use recover 8 times. So yeah, I think Gholdengo is fine. I don't think the tier would be in a horrible spot without it, but I do think it would hurt Steel a lot. And I don't think it would be incredibly justified either, for the amount of help it would help on other types. Like I said, I just don't feel like it does these insane things that people have been saying it can do. It's just a very solid mono doing its job. So I think I'd be no ban side on Gholdengo. Now, Archaludon. Archaludon is a noob killer Pokemon. I'll just say that straight up. It is a noob killer. But outside of noob killing, it is also still really good. So, is it a problematic Pokemon? Personally, I don't think so. And I attest that mainly because if it had really good special defense, I would say it needs to get banned immediately. But it doesn't. So I think it's fine. Pokemon are allowed to be ridiculous in certain aspects. Especially defensive Pokemon. As long as you have a clear weakness. And Archaludon is just one of those Pokemon. It's not like Toxapex where it's bulky on both sides for some godforsaken reason. And can do all the nonsense it was doing in Gen 7 and Gen 8. It's not like that. It has a clear weakness. It can be chipped out. It can be forced out, and it doesn't do literally everything. It can be forced out. It can be hit with Hazard Chip. It can lose its leftovers. It can get O-code by a special attacker, which every team should have a special attacker. Yeah, it's just a really good Mon at doing what it needs to do. It's a very good physical wall. And yes, I know people are going to be like, oh, but the Choice Scarf sets. The Choice Scarf sets are fine. They're also fine. Like, yes, you'll get caught off guard by it like 1 or 2 times, but if you look properly and just play and posture around the possibility of it being Choice Scarf properly, it shouldn't be that big of an issue. And I say this as someone who has had to deal with the set like multiple times. I've been able to catch it out like very consistently on ladder, especially on higher ladder in playing against 1600s plus players. So I do think Choice Scarf Archaludon isn't even that big of an issue. And having to play the 50-50 also just isn't that bad, because Choice Scarf Archaludon is only annoying for a few subset of Pokemon, as opposed to just being really strong as well. It's not like it's a Aegislash where I can't believe I'm talking about Aegislash again, but it's not like Aegislash where it could just be in a Toxic Stall set and also still be a problem for everyone, while being the Choice Specs or Sword Stance set. Not actually, no, it did run Choice Specs back then, but it can't be the Nasty Blood or Sword Dance sets and also still be a problem to most walls in game. It's not doing that. It's not quite like that. And I know it's still an unfair comparison to make between the two of them, but I do think that it should be brought up because is Archaludon actually just causing really insane 50-50s? I would argue that Meowscarada and Greninja are more obnoxious in that regard. Now, Greninja actually fell off this tournament, as a side note, but back when I was playing a lot of ladder, Meowscarada and Greninja, having to play the 50-50 between those two was genuinely annoying for specific types. And I think it's more annoying for that. That 50-50 is more annoying than the 50-50 with Archaludon. And I think Archaludon is just... I just think it's a non-issue. I truly think the hate for it is really overblown. Like, yes, it does feel obnoxious that it is just that strong of a physical defensive wall, and that it gets stamina boosts too. Like, it is obnoxious. But Mudsdale also has stamina, and also can be annoying in that regard. Archaludon is just basically a super version of that, and it's still not even that broken because of all the weaknesses I've already mentioned before. It doesn't have consistent recovery, it can get worn down very easily, it has a hittable weakness in its special defense. It's not the worst thing to deal with in the world. There are a lot more problematic Pokemon in this metagame, and Archaludon is just not one of them. So I will be very against. I think this mon is perfectly fine. It does what it needs to do, and it does it very well, and I don't think it at any point needs to be banned. Would the metagame be better off without it? I don't really think so. Because I think Steel and Dragon both really, really like having those Pokemon. And, like, they might not lose out on a ton. Well, actually, no, they would lose out quite a bit on not having that Pokemon. But I also think we don't really gain that much for getting rid of it, besides maybe a few different types of teams, or a few different types being a little bit more viable. But yeah, I think Archaludon's perfectly fine. I don't think that anything is happening to that. Now, Flutter Mane. Flutter Mane is a Pokemon of all time. So Flutter Mane's actually a very interesting thing to talk about, because the issue with this mon is that it's on two types that are deemed not very good in metagame. It's actually what I was talking about with Volcarona in the past. Because in the past, Volcarona is referred to as a mon that... Well, Volcarona was just a really good mon on two not great types. But Flutter Mane is in a similar situation. Fairy was not seen as that good, but obviously it's a lot better than people thought it was. But Flutter Mane is on two types that aren't really dominant in the metagame. But it's incredibly powerful on both those types. And it is doing basically the same thing on those two types. It's not really unique, different playstyles on either type. It is either spammy Choice Specs, or it's bulky Specs, or it's Choice Scarf, or it's Thunder Wave, or it's whatever set it's running. It's doing obnoxious Flutter Mane things and doing Flutter Mane moments all the time. It's just an insanely powerful Pokemon. But it's on two types that can't support it as well as they want it to, and also just aren't that impressive in the metagame, even with access to that mon. So, my opinion on Flutter Mane is that it can feel like a really obnoxious mon to deal with. But I do think that it is fine, generally. And the reasonings I'm going to use are that Flutter Mane just generally is very easy to target on the physical side. There's a lot of sucker punchers in the tier, so they can deal with that. And also, but again, the issue is that it's incredibly fast, so a lot of physical attackers can't really even check it like they would like. And it being specially defensive as well as hitting hard on the special side is also really obnoxious, and that's also kind of similar to Volcarona because it makes it harder to revenge kill it. Like, typically, mons like Flutter Mane are frail on both sides, but for some reason they decided that they wanted to make it especially bulky. So stuff that should check it, like Thunderclap on Choice Specs, or actually, yeah, Thunderclap on Choice Specs Raging Bolt should OHKO that thing. It should do that for the type of mon that it is, but it doesn't, because for some reason it has 135 special defense. So that aspect of it is very obnoxious. It being harder to check for special attackers specifically is really obnoxious, and I do think that is annoying, because not every team is going to have the ability or have the luxury of having a special attacker that can check Flutter Mane, that can also break through its special defense when it's at full HP and not chip down. That is annoying. I think that is legitimately annoying and definitely something that is valid to complain about. But everything else is just standard offensive non-fair. It's very good at being an offensive Pokemon, has very good dual stab typings, it's very powerful, it's very hard, it's very fast. Its speed is actually quite ludicrous, but it's still manageable because there are a good amount of Choice Scarfers that can deal with it. But yeah, I do think it's fine. I wouldn't be opposed to tier reaction though, because it does feel obnoxious in certain aspects. And I think there are valid complaints about it. But I think for the most part it's fine. So I'm going to state that I have a neutral opinion on it, because I can't really take a strong stance on one or the other. I can't really super convince that Flutter Mane isn't broken, because it is fitting into that broken territory. But again, it's on two types that can't really support it as well as it can, but I'm going to be honest, I think Fairy, especially after this tournament with its win rate, I think Fairy might be proving that Flutter Mane is a bit of a problem. Because Fairy has been shown to be able to support it pretty well. with Klefki and Tinkaton as well can also do very well in setting that mod up. So make of that what you will, but I will leave it as a neutral opinion. Alright, so obviously I did not play MPL or win any games because I don't participate in Tour Wars. I'm not top 50 in the ladder. I'm still top 500 on a couple of accounts, but I'm not top 50. I'm not top 100 either at the moment because I haven't been playing a ton. I think the last time I grinded, I think I got like 175 plus on the ladder. But yeah, I did not answer yes. And is there anything else I already mentioned you would like the council to look into? So yeah, when it comes to my thoughts on metagame and things that I think are problematic about it, like I said, I think this metagame is totally fine, for the most part. There's obviously some stuff like Ogerpon-H Flame just completely moving over certain types, and stuff like that. It's hard for this group of volunteers to actually make a metagame that's fun for literally everyone, because that's the dream of every game designer, right? And I'm not saying that the volunteers that work on the site are game designers, but it's very hard to make something fun for literally everyone, because there's going to be people that are dissatisfied because of certain aspects. Whether or not they're valid is up to interpretation, but I do think that generally, I think the council has done a very good job with this metagame specifically. They should still respect and listen to feedback that players are giving, even if they keep spamming and spamming and spamming and spamming the same type of bans, and they keep not listening to whatever reasonings is given to why they don't get investigated. But I think they should still keep that clear communication open, but try to be civil about it as well, because we have had problems with that in the past, especially with the Caesar debacle. That was not pretty. But yeah, if there's anything else I would say about this metagame that could be problematic, I can't really say anything. I mean, arguably heavy-duty boots probably might be the biggest problem, because if you get rid of heavy-duty boots, suddenly Volcarona is no longer an issue. Suddenly, Cinderace isn't as obnoxious as it usually is. Suddenly, a lot of these pivots and these defensive Pokemon that are usually annoying and hard to take down aren't nearly as obnoxious or hard to take down, like Alomomola, as we saw in this tournament, Dondozo as well. Suddenly, those don't become problematic if Heavy Duty Boots is removed. But is Heavy Duty Boots' removal really necessary? I don't think so, but if there's anything that the council should look into, it might just be that. Just a general look on how Heavy Duty Boots affects the metagame and how people feel about that. I personally think boots are fine, but there can be an argument, a legitimate argument made that boots might be unhealthy for this metagame. Because you do see boots a lot. But yeah. I think that's the only thing that they maybe look into. I think everything else about the metagame is perfectly fine now. It's just I'd say this is probably one of the most fun type metagames I've played. I would put it under Sun and Moon though, because Sun and Moon was peak. I think Sun and Moon was probably one of the best metagames ever for monotype, and I think that metagame is generally probably as close to a perfect monotype metagame as we're going to get. Because that metagame isn't perfect. Just so we're clear, that metagame isn't perfect either. It still has its problems, but I do think when it comes to getting as close to utopian monotype metagame as possible, Sun and Moon was the closest we could get. And there's a lot of reasons for that I could make a whole video about, but yeah. I do think that this is a good metagame, and I had a lot of fun watching it, and I'm having fun playing it. But yeah, those are my thoughts, so I will submit this. And we will be done with this video. So, now that MWP is over, I will be making videos, discussion videos, talking about different aspects of the metagame, stuff I've noticed from MWP, and there's also a post made by one of our mods in Ethereal Sword, I believe his name is, but he made a very interesting post that I'm going to respond to in the next video. So be sure to look out for that, but there is a possibility that I could also post another for fun video. Like, for example, in the background right now, I'm trying to make a team with Galarian Articuno, work on the monotype ladder. It's taking a while to try and find a way to make it work, but I am trying. But yeah. I will see you guys in the next video. Take care of yourselves, and yeah, I'll see you guys.